Meta was hit with a record-breaking $1.3 billion fine over Facebook data transfers to the US. Now, this is the largest fine of its kind, but it's definitely not the first one that's ever happened. Now, with that, EU regulators have ordered Facebook to stop transferring the data of EU citizens back to the US. Facebook says they do this because they need to transfer the data to the US to get more targeted ads so that they can send it back to EU and give it to the consumers that use the platform over there. But after complaints that stem back to 2013 and revelations by whistleblower Edward Snowden about the US's mass surveillance programs that go on around the world, including in the US, which I think the Twitter files has shown is something they do actually fairly aggressively in the US. That said, EU wants it to stop. So with that, Ireland's Data Protection Commission, who has assessed this fine, said that the current legal framework for data transfers to the US did not address the fundamental risks and rights of EU users. Now, and that violated the GDPR, and the fine exceeds the previous EU record of 746 million. I believe that's euros, so in US dollar, that's probably closer to 850 million. But that was leveled against Amazon in 2021 for pretty similar privacy violations. The very fascinating part of this is that they decided it was worth an extra 500 million, making it a massive fine. And the EU recently, I would say, is on a roll for making these fines actually hurt the company instead of just be another fine. And so transferring the data to the US, again, is critical for Meta's vast ad targeting operation, which relies on processing multiple streams of personal data from its users. And last year, Meta said that it would be forced to consider shutting down Facebook and Instagram in the EU if it wasn't able to send data back to the US. That seems like something they just say to try and blackmail EU lawmakers. And the reason I say that is because they will ultimately look and go, wait, we actually make like a ton of money from our EU people, and we could actually have things happen quicker and better if we had servers there anyways. Therefore, why wouldn't we put our equipment there? That just doesn't make sense. So I think at the end of the day, they probably would put some servers there and do some processing in the EU if they were forced to, just like Apple with the iPhone and the Type-C versus Lightning. At the end of the day, Apple's going to make a USB-C iPhone because that makes more sense than not. And so we're going to probably see that happen here at some point, assuming this keeps going the way it is. So previously, these data transfers were protected by a transatlantic pact known as the Privacy Shield. But this framework was declared invalid in 2020 after the EU's top court found that it did not protect basically the data of EU residents from being scraped by the US surveillance programs, which, if we're all honest, should also be taken into account here in the US, that they do this. And this ruling was not given a response by acclaimed Australian lawyer Max Schrems, whose legal battle against Facebook dates back to 2013 and original Snowden Edward Snowden started all this stuff, basically. So now, although Meta has been ordered to stop these data transfers, there are a number of caveats that benefit the US social media giant. First off, the ruling only applies to data from Facebook, not from their other companies like, you have Instagram, you have WhatsApp, and second, there is a 5-month grace period before it has to stop these transfers entirely. This grace period partially makes sense because it is probably a ton of data to figure out what they're going to do with, and they need time if they're going to build the infrastructure, even a quick build of infrastructure just to be able to do that in the EU if that's where they decide to take it. Now, there is a further 6-month deadline to stop holding its current data it holds in the US. So in that 6 months, Meta could definitely throw up servers in the EU and transfer all that data over and not lose anything if they really wanted to. That said, third and most important, the EU and US are currently negotiating a deal to transfer data that could be in place by early this summer, as late as October. So this is a massive problem for Meta right now that could be gone by October, and we're going to have to wait and see if that's actually what goes on, if they end up making this deal or not. But despite the record-breaking size of the fine, experts doubt that it will change anything fundamental with Meta's policy. Like I said, I think all this will do is Meta will look at it and go, If we're going to be forced to do this, we're going to tell you we're going to pull out until it's in place. And then once it's in place, we'll build some servers over there, we'll process data over there, and move on with life. Now, to be fair, if they really wanted to, if they were really giving this data to the US government, they could still do it with servers in the EU. That doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't change that much, other than it might be a little harder, might take a little more time. There's still plenty of things that are going to go on here, but Meta itself describes the fine as unjustified and unnecessary, which they're partially right, and they're also, on the other hand, if you care about your privacy and all the data that's collected on you, they're not right, but those people probably don't use Facebook anyways. But great to see that the EU is trying to do something about it and protect their people. That said, I'm sure the EU is partially doing this so they can also just collect the data instead of only the US collecting the data. So kind of a double-edged sword, if you ask me. But they're, whatever. That's what the EU wants to do with their citizens. That's what they're going to do, I guess.